Hello YouTube, thank you for joining me with this fireside chat, curling up with a nice cup of hot cocoa here. This video is for people who are buying a new camera, either for yourself or as a Christmas gift and you're just not sure which camera to buy. So if you already know a ton about cameras, if DxO Mark means anything to you, just stop watching. But for the rest of you, I'm going to lay out in the simplest terms exactly what you need to know to buy a new camera for yourself or the budding photographer in your life. Alright, so you're getting a new camera. You might have seen articles comparing pixel counts and buffer speeds and all types of that stuff. This is probably your first serious camera, but just know that most of that stuff doesn't matter, and what does matter I'm going to spell out for you here in this video. But no matter what you pick, it's going to be fine. Cameras have gotten so much better. Pretty much any camera you buy, if you buy one new, you are going to learn a ton. It's going to work great for you, but when you do learn a ton, you're going to know what it is that you need so that you're going to upgrade eventually anyway, and you're going to know what features that you look for. But right now, almost any camera is going to work. You can't go wrong, but this is a video to help you decide and pick that first camera. Alright, so first things first, I have a few key questions to ask you. First thing is, what is your budget? Alright, so if you're a doctor or a lawyer or something, that's awesome. But if you only have $500 to spend, you have to be a little more realistic about that and stick to your budget. As you learn more, you'll know what upgrades you want, and spending less money to start is a good idea anyway, because I'm just helping you get that first one. You're gonna start shooting A or start shooting B. You'll get there. For now, start basic, start simple. It's fine. Next question is, what are you photographing? Every camera can shoot every subject. I have photos that I've shot with this camera and photos that I've shot with this camera, and if you look at my website, I bet you can't tell the difference, even though one is like a $4,000 camera and the other one's a $500 camera. So, if you aren't sure or you're just starting out and you shoot everything, don't worry about it. But if you do know what it is that you tend to shoot the most, this is important to keep in mind. If you're mainly shooting landscapes, you might lean towards that full frame sensor with the wide angle lenses. If you're shooting small kids running around, you're probably going to want something that has higher frame rates when it comes to burst mode. But we'll get to all of that. Next, how big are your hands? No, like seriously. Having a camera that fits you comfortably is really important. So this camera has a grip on it, but this is kind of how I like to hold my camera, and it is personal preference. Versus this is my first camera, and it feels a little small in my hands. So this is, again, just personal preference. If you have really small hands, something like this is going to be way too big for you, and there are tons of mirrorless options. Which brings me to my next question. How much stuff do you want to carry around? A full-size DSLR might sound better because marketing, but if you don't absolutely need all those features, or you plan on hiking a lot or doing street photography, then something smaller, a little more incognito, a little easier to carry around might be better for you. If I had to do it all over again today, I might go mirrorless. And the final question to think about, what do your friends use? We'll get to that. So pause this video until you have answers to those questions. Are you ready? Great, let's talk features. So the first one is sensor size. This actually defines the type of camera. So the first one is full frame, just like this guy here. It means that the sensor size is same as a 35mm piece of film. The second is APS-C, which is a slightly smaller. The important thing to note about this sensor is that it actually crops in on your photo, so you don't get the full lens field of view. This is bad if you're shooting landscapes, or great if you shoot sports and wildlife and just want that little extra bit of zoom. The last size is micro 4/3. Just like APS-C, there is a crop factor, factor, although this one has even more of a crop factor and is usually found in those mirrorless cameras. The second thing is RAW versus JPEG. 99% of cameras sold today shoot RAW. Just get a camera that shoots RAW. Next is megapixel count. This is something that camera manufacturers love to push. They love high megapixels counts. When you're first starting out, this does not matter, like, at all. Not at all. You're probably only going to be posting it online anyway, which means crunching it down to this little tiny file and throwing those pixels out anyway. Obviously, having more detail is important, but with more detail comes higher file sizes and slower speeds, both in your camera and on your computer. I find anywhere between 18 to 36 megapixels is plenty. Any larger and you better have plenty of hard drive space and a fast computer to match. To put it in perspective, the very first Vogue magazine that was shot with a digital camera, that camera had 3 megapixels. So my first camera here, this is 12 megapixels. I don't think I've ever complained that files were too small, so no matter what you get, I'm sure it'll be fine. Next is frames per second, or how many it can do in a burst. I really think Veep said it best.
What are you shooting with?
This is a 5D.
Not a 1D?
No. Why would I need a 1D to shoot this?
I have a 1D. Cool. I mean, it's more expensive, but it's a really nice camera.
You shoot a lot of sports? Moving action, you take hundreds of pictures of herons catching fish? Because otherwise you don't need a 1D.
Right, but I have a 1D.
If you're like me, then whenever you use burst mode, at best you're hoping that you get that one usable frame in the middle. Like if I'm doing a wedding, that first kiss. Of course, you won't be shooting a wedding with your beginner camera. But if you're more like my mom, you'll accidentally use burst and have 100 of the same picture and then never ever delete them. But if your camera can shoot like 3 frames per second, you're fine. That'll be plenty. It won't feel slow. Next is having good low light or good high ISO performance. This is one where a race to the top, I say better is actually better. So without additional lighting, just shooting high ISO all night still looks like garbage. That's not going to get rid of the craft of lighting and photography. It is not a cure-all to better photos, but this was my very first limitation that I ran into and the reason that I upgraded from my very first camera. At some point, it basically turns into night vision, so there is diminishing returns at that higher end, but clean images in low light will make you happier to share your photos. Wi-Fi or GPS? Unless you need this feature, unless it's something you absolutely know you need, you'll know you need it. You'll know that you go hiking a lot and you need the GPS to find that one bird sighting, whatever. If you're not doing that kind of stuff, skip it. You don't need it. I can count on one hand in the past 10 years how many times I wish I had Wi-Fi. It's nice, but it's not worth paying for and shouldn't be a deciding factor. Weatherproofing. So please keep in mind, this does not mean waterproof. This does not mean you can go into a sandstorm. This does not mean you can shoot a color run. This means that the body is constructed to keep out light dust from getting in between the seams or any of the buttons. If you don't also have weatherproof lenses, I do have weatherproof lenses. This is not one of them. Dust can still get in right here where the lens meets the body, right in that seam. So a weatherproof weatherproof ceiling here, but not here, means you don't have weatherproof ceiling. Dust can still get in. So it is a really nice feature. It is usually reserved for higher end camera bodies. It's probably not something you're gonna have on your first camera. Autofocus points. Alright, so this camera here has 61 autofocus points. There's a new Sony camera that has 425 autofocus points. My first camera had 9 autofocus points. I know, it's so cute. All this means is how many points that your camera uses to find what is in focus. More points means that it will focus faster, but at a certain point, you're talking fractions of a second difference. If that number, autofocus points, is in the double digits, Don't worry about it. It's going to be plenty. Flip out display. So, are you planning on doing vlogging? If yes, absolutely need a flip out display. This is awesome. In fact, my next camera will have one. For normal photography, nah, you'll never use it. There are two different types of flip out displays. There are ones that literally just tilt, and there are ones that completely flip out. If you're going to get one with a flip out, make sure it has the flip out and not just the tilt. So that way, if you're doing it vlogging style, you can flip this around and actually see what you're looking at. So speaking of video, 4K video. I know everything is moving this way. I personally don't actually have a way to display anything in 4K yet. My TV is 1080. My monitors are 2K. If you want 4K, awesome. It's a thing that's nice, especially if you're doing a video project that's shot in 4K. You can crop it later down to that 1080 frame and recompose, which is something that you can't really do if you shot it originally in 1080. My one hard line, look at the camera specs. If it says it can shoot 4K, but it's only 15 frames per second, this is something weird that they do to trick you. They are lying to you. It does not shoot proper 4K, and you will never use it because that looks garbage. Look for 24, ideally 30, or sometimes crazy 60 frames per second while shooting 4K, and you're good to go. Image stabilization. So this means something very different for every camera manufacturer, and some are better than others. There are two types of stabilization, in camera and in lens. So companies like Canon don't have in-camera stabilization on any of their models. You're going to pay more for their lenses that do have stabilization, but the stabilization in those lenses is pretty good. Companies like Sony have really good in-camera stabilization, and their lenses can be less expensive as a result, since you kind of already paid for that. I would say from personal experience that some stabilization is better than none. Sony and Panasonic definitely leading the pack there, but unless you're doing a ton of video work and night shooting, it's not really a feature worth paying for, especially on an entry-level camera. Next is electronic viewfinder. Alright, so there's a lot of controversy about electronic viewfinders because it comes with a trade-off. So my Canon Rebel here has a 96% viewfinder. That means that when I look through the eyepiece, there is a sliver on every side that I am not actually seeing, which will be in the photo. This can be super frustrating if it means that there's stuff that you have to crop out because you didn't see it the first time. An electronic viewfinder does solve that, or you can get a more expensive camera body that has that. On an entry-level model, not going to make a huge ton of difference. But electronic viewfinder does solve that. It removes the mirror that flips up and makes this camera huge. So you'll have a camera that is smaller, lighter, it's quieter because you don't have the sound of that mirror flipping up and down with no effect to image quality. You can look through the viewfinder and see really complex data like your focus or the zebra stripes that give you exposure information while you're shooting. That's pretty cool. On the flip side, it is an electronic display with low resolution, so stuff might look fuzzy while you are shooting it. It temporarily obliterates your night vision if you're doing anything in the dark. And there is a larger latency with electronic viewfinders than there are with the optical mirror viewfinders. When you put latency is between when you push the button and when it actually takes the picture. Finally, electronic viewfinders also use significantly more power than their mirrored counterparts. Speaking of which, let's talk battery life. A Sony a7S II battery lasts about an hour under heavy shooting. The Sony a7 III improved that to about 3 hours, but my Canon E6 battery lasts about 8 hours, which is double with a battery grip. So you are going to want spare batteries regardless of which model you pick, but some models are going to need more spare batteries than others. Finally, the last thing to consider is the price and availability of lenses and accessories. So when you're choosing a brand, you don't have to love the specific model that you have forever, but you are married to that brand. In fact, that's why I'm not naming specific camera models in this video, because by the time that you watch it, those recommendations will already be outdated. But the more you get invested in lenses, the harder it is to jump ship and start with a new brand. Brings us to our last question. I asked you, what do your friends use? Because if you get the same thing as your friends, you can borrow and trade stuff. You can even try before you buy. It will be so much easier to go shooting together. When I was in college, I immediately started spending more time with the guy that shot Canon, while almost everyone else shot Nikon for this very reason. Don't have a fisheye lens? Eric does. So, the top 3 brands, in no particular order, are Canon, Sony, Nikon. There are also manufacturers that, as far as I know, don't actually make cameras, but they make lenses for these top brands, like Tamron and Sigma. I actually have a tip for those third-party lenses. There's a link to it in the iCard or down in the description. If your focus is video, I would highly recommend Sony right now, followed by Canon. If your focus is just photography, I would recommend Canon, followed by Nikon. Ultimately, it is a very personal decision. Choose what works best for you. And when I was looking online trying to get other people's ideas of the best features and things to look for when you're getting a new camera, people said buy used. Because you can get a great deal on a pro body camera like this one for the same price or less as walking into a Best Buy and getting it for this. I got my first camera, this guy here, at Costco, because I just walked into Costco, plunked down some cash, and said, I don't know anything about cameras, what can you get me? But if I actually had someone like me to tell me this advice, I would have started searching Craigslist and found used and figured out what works best for me, because you can get a way better camera that way that will last you a lot longer. So if you made it this far, I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for watching. This will be my last video until the new year. Cheers. So this is actually my 50-second video. So it has been an amazing year. I cannot wait to do it again for all of you. There have been tutorials, gear reviews, inspiration, discussion, behind the scenes content. If you have enjoyed my videos and learned anything useful, then I would like to announce that I now have a Patreon. It only has one tier at the moment, but for $1 a month you can have ad block, absolution. No need to feel guilty using that ad blocker that lowers ad revenue for creators such as myself. I may add more tiers in the future, but right now, that's it. Nice, easy, simple. So you can go to patreon.com/nomcreative, the name of this channel, if that sounds like something you want to do. These videos do take a lot of time, energy, and indeed money to make. So every little bit helps. Thank you so much. I do hope you enjoy your new camera. I hope you subscribe and hit that bell so you can get notified when new tutorials come out. And I hope you have a very Merry Christmas or holiday of your choosing. And I will see you again in a few weeks with a full year of weekly tutorials. Thank you so much. See you soon.